In a quiet corner of a local music school, a woman sat silently on a wooden bench, her eyes watching the group of students and teachers gathered around the piano. She wore a plain gray shawl over a simple dress, and her dark hair was tied neatly in a low bun. She didn't speak much. Most people assumed she was just someone from the maintenance staff or maybe a student's guardian. No one really paid attention to her. She was always polite, always helpful, and always quiet. This music workshop was meant to help students get better at playing classical pieces. The teachers were serious, and the students were nervous, especially today. The topic was one of the most difficult piano pieces, Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2. Even hearing the name made most of the students fidget in their chairs. The teachers were explaining the key changes, the finger work, and the emotion required to play it properly. It was the kind of piece that even professionals found challenging. After explaining the theory part, one of the teachers looked around the room and asked if anyone wanted to try playing a short section. The room fell completely silent. No one raised their hand. Everyone avoided eye contact. Some giggled nervously. It was clear that no one felt ready to even touch the piano for this piece. One of the teachers, Doran, to lighten the mood, pointed toward the quiet woman in the back and smiled. "What about you? Would you like to give it a shot?" Everyone turned to look at her. Some of the students chuckled. The woman looked surprised but not offended. She stood up slowly and walked toward the piano. There was no sign of fear on her face, just calmness. She sat down, adjusted the bench slightly, and placed her fingers gently on the keys. The room was still. No one really expected anything. Maybe she would just touch a few notes and laugh it off. But then she began to play. The moment her fingers moved across the piano, something changed in the room. It was like someone had suddenly opened a window and let fresh air rush in. Sound was rich, deep, and full of emotion. The technique was flawless. Her hands moved with grace and confidence, as if the piano was part of her body. Every note came out clean, full of life and feeling. The teachers were frozen. The students stopped breathing for a moment. This was not a beginner. This was not someone who had just picked up a few lessons. This was someone who knew the piano deeply, someone who had spent years with it. She didn't just play the notes. She made them speak. When she finished the short section, she lifted her hands, slowly, and stood up, without saying anything. She walked back to her bench and sat down, just as quietly as before. The room remained silent for a few seconds. Then a few claps started. Soon, the whole room was applauding her. She looked down at her hands and smiled softly, but didn't say a word. No one knew what to think. Who was this woman? Why was she sitting quietly all this time, while they had been struggling with basic techniques? One of the students whispered, "She plays better than the teachers." That evening, after the class ended, the teachers stayed behind, still talking. About her performance, one of them said, "There's no way she learned that recently. She must have had years of training." But the question remained, why would someone with that kind of talent be hiding in plain sight? They didn't know it yet, but they had just witnessed the return of someone truly special, someone who had once been a star in the music world, and who had chosen to leave it all behind. And now, without anyone expecting it, her story was starting all over again. After that unexpected performance, the mood of the entire room had shifted. Everyone now looked at the quiet woman with new eyes. The teachers, who had been leading the session confidently just minutes earlier, now seemed unsure, even a little embarrassed. The students whispered among themselves, still amazed. No one had expected something like that from someone who barely spoke and had never touched the piano before in front of them. The next day, she came again, just like before. She walked in quietly, nodded at the teachers, and sat in her usual spot at the back. She didn't act any different. No proud smile, no attention-seeking behavior. She simply sat, listened, and helped clean up some chairs, like she always did. Now, people kept glancing her way, wondering who she really was. One of the younger teachers, clearly curious and maybe even a little nervous, walked up to her during the break. "That was amazing yesterday," he said softly, almost like he was afraid to offend her. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She smiled politely, looked down, and replied, "I practiced a lot." "A long time ago?" It was a simple answer, but it only created more questions. A long time ago? What did that mean? Was she a retired musician, a forgotten performer, or someone who gave it up for some reason? Teachers couldn't stop thinking about her. That evening, a few of them searched her name online using the sign-in sheet from the workshop. What they found left them speechless. Decades ago, there had been a young girl with the same name who had made waves in the classical music world. A child prodigy from a small town who had trained under a European master and played concerts in cities like Vienna and Berlin. She had been on the path to becoming one of the world's finest pianists. Then, suddenly, her name disappeared from the headlines. No farewell concert, no public statement. She had simply vanished from the stage. Could this quiet woman really be the same person? Back at the school, the students had also picked up on the mystery. One girl who loved classical music had even shown a video on her phone to others. "Look," she said, showing an old, grainy video clip. "That's her, right? The same hands, the same playing style." People started whispering her name with respect now. They began calling her Madam instead of Auntie or Sister. But the woman didn't seem to notice. Or maybe she just didn't care. She still arrived early, still helped set things up, and still sat quietly at the back. It was clear she didn't want to be the center of attention, but her presence was no longer invisible. One day, the lead teacher stood in front of the group and said, "Sometimes we make assumptions about people based on how they look or how much they talk, but talent doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers." The students nodded. They all knew who he was talking about. Later that week, the school director approached her privately. He gently asked if she would consider performing at their upcoming student concert. Just one piece. She hesitated. Her smile faded for a second, and her fingers gripped her shawl. "It's been many years," she said quietly. "We understand," he replied. "But if you feel ready, it would mean a lot to the students. They look up to you now." She didn't give an answer right away, but something in her eyes had changed. Maybe a door inside her had started to open again, a door that had been closed for a very long time, and though no one knew for sure, it felt like the story of the quiet woman was far from over. The next few days went by quietly, but the woman stayed on everyone's mind. Even though she continued to sit in the back, just like before, there was something different now. Students smiled at her more often. Teachers nodded respectfully when they passed her. Some even tried to talk to her, hoping she would open up. One afternoon, while the students were practicing scales and finger exercises, a soft voice called out to her from the front row. "Can you help me with this part?" Shy girl asked, holding up a sheet of music. The woman hesitated, then walked over and looked at the notes. She didn't say much, just showed the girl how to move her fingers and count the timing. Within a few minutes, the student was playing better than she ever had before. Others noticed and came to her one by one, asking small questions. She didn't give long lectures. She just gave calm, clear advice. Her eyes always focused, her voice always gentle. The teachers watched from a distance, surprised. She wasn't just a good pianist. She was a natural teacher too. Later that evening, the younger teacher who had first spoken to her found her sitting outside on a bench near the school garden. He sat beside her, silent at first. Then he said softly, "We looked you up. We saw your name, your old videos. You were famous?" She looked down at her hands. "That was another life," she replied. He didn't push her, but she slowly began to speak. "I started learning piano when I was 5. My mother saved every rupee to get me a small keyboard. Later, I got a scholarship. I went abroad. I played in concert halls I'd only seen in books. People clapped for me. Reporters came. I was on posters." She stopped for a moment, her eyes lost in memory. "Then my mother passed away. I was only 18. I came back home for the funeral and found out my father couldn't walk anymore. I couldn't leave him alone, so I stayed. Slowly, the calls stopped coming. The concerts, the invitations, all disappeared. The teacher was quiet, listening with full attention. I gave lessons here and there, Then I got married, had children, life became simple, busy. I didn't have time for music the way I used to. And honestly, after a while, I thought maybe no one even remembered me. I didn't mind. I had my family, and I was at peace. She gave a small smile. I never really stopped playing. Late at night, when everyone was asleep, I'd sit with the piano, not to perform, just to feel. Something I had missed. The teacher asked, "Why did you come to the workshop?" She replied, "My youngest son moved abroad this year." My husband said, "Why don't you go out more? Do something for yourself. I found this place online. I just wanted to listen. I didn't plan to play." There was a pause, and now, he asked gently. She looked toward the school building where the sound of students laughing and playing instruments could be heard. Now, I don't know. Maybe it's not too late. The next morning, she came to class holding a thin folder. It had her old music sheets worn out, edges bent, notes written in pencil. She placed them on the teacher's desk and said softly, "If it's all right, I'd like to try something at the concert." The teachers looked at each other, eyes wide with joy. The humble woman, who once lit up stages across the world, was finally ready to play again, not as a performer, but as someone who had found herself once more. The teachers were more than happy to include her in the concert. In fact, they looked almost honored when she asked. One of them offered to help her choose a piece, but she shook her head gently and said, "I already know what I want to play." She chose a soft, emotional piece, something that didn't scream for attention but spoke straight to the heart. It wasn't flashy or loud. It was a piece filled with quiet beauty, something that only someone with deep life experience could truly understand and express. In the following days, she came early to the school to practice. She never asked anyone for help. She simply sat. At the piano, placed her worn-out music sheets on the stand, and started to play. It wasn't about perfection. It was about feeling. And everyone who passed by the room would stop for a few seconds just to listen, even students who usually played fast. Dramatic music started sitting outside the room quietly, just to hear her play. It was like the walls themselves were learning something new from her. One afternoon, as she finished her practice, a small boy from the beginner class stood near the door, watching her silently. He was holding a basic music book and looked unsure. She noticed him and smiled, then waved him in. "Want to sit beside me?" she asked. He nodded quickly and ran over. She showed him a simple tune and asked him to play. His fingers were shaky at first, but she placed her hand over his gently. "Slow down," she said. "Feel the music. Don't fight it." He smiled, and something clicked. For the first time, the boy played the tune without mistakes. From that day on, more students started asking for her help. She never acted like a master or gave long lectures. She just listened, guided, and reminded them that music wasn't only about speed or skill. It was about heart. The concert days started getting closer, and excitement filled the air. Posters were printed, chairs arranged, and rehearsals scheduled. Her name wasn't in big letters, and she didn't ask for it to be, but word had spread. People from outside the school started asking, "Is it true? Is she really performing after all these years?" On the final day of rehearsal, the hall was quiet except for her. She played through her piece from beginning to end. A few teachers stood at the back, listening, their eyes misty. They had seen many musicians in their careers, but this felt different. This wasn't about showing off. It was about sharing something deep and real. That night, as she packed her music sheets, the same young teacher who had spoken to her before walked up and said, "Are you nervous?" She paused, smiled, and said a little, "But this time, I'm not playing to prove anything, just playing for the joy of it." He nodded. "That's the best reason to play." When she returned home, she opened her old piano bench and found a faded photo of her with her mother standing beside a grand piano. Her fingers touched the picture and she whispered, "You'll be with me tomorrow." The next day was the concert. The school hall was full. Students, teachers, parents, and a few unfamiliar faces who had heard about her through whispers and memories. Backstage, she sat alone, calm and steady. She wasn't dressed in anything flashy, just a simple suit. With her hair tied back neatly, She looked exactly the same, humble, kind, and quietly powerful. As her name was called, she stood up and walked toward the stage. There was no fear in her eyes, only peace, and though no one knew what the next few minutes would bring, everyone could feel it. Something beautiful was about to happen. The lights in the concert hall were dim, and the audience sat in complete silence. Everyone's eyes were fixed on the stage. The host had just announced her name, and though many people in the crowd didn't know much about her, they had all heard the whispers. Some were curious, some were excited, some especially. The students were holding their breath. She walked onto the stage slowly, calmly, holding her sheet music in one hand. Her steps were light, but her presence felt strong. She didn't look nervous. Her eyes scanned the audience for a second, then gently focused on the grand piano waiting at the center. The hall was so quiet that even her soft footsteps echoed. She sat down on the bench, placed the sheet gently on the stand, and closed her eyes for a brief moment. Her hands rested lightly on the keys, not pressing, just touching, like reconnecting with an old friend. Then she began to play. The first note rang out clear, soft, and full of emotion. Then came the next, and the next. Within seconds, the entire hall was filled with music that didn't just reach ears, but touched hearts. There was something about her playing that felt different. It wasn't just skill. It wasn't just speed or power. It was feeling, pure and deep. All right. Note carried a story. Every pause had meaning. Every soft rise and fall told of joy, loss, love, and memories that went beyond words. People in the audience sat frozen. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others leaned forward, not wanting to miss a single second. Even the restless little children who had been fidgeting minutes earlier were now still, caught in the spell of her music. Backstage, a few teachers stood quietly, their eyes moist. One of them whispered, "This is what real music is. This is what we try to teach," and she's showing it without saying a word. Her fingers moved across the keys like water flowing in a stream, gentle, natural, and without effort. It was as if the piano was breathing through her. She didn't try to impress anyone. She didn't add extra flourishes or dramatic movements. She just played with honesty. And in doing so, she connected with every single person in the room. As she reached the end of the piece, the final notes hung in the air for a few moments before fading into silence. She slowly lifted her hands and rested them in her lap. She didn't bow or wait for applause. She just sat still, peaceful. Then the silence broke. The hall erupted in claps, loud and long, as people stood up from their seats. Some wiped their eyes, some cheered. The students clapped the loudest, their faces lit with pure admiration, but she didn't seem to expect any of it. She stood up gently, gave a small nod of thanks, and walked off the stage the same way she had come, with calm and grace. Backstage, one of the young girls from the beginner class ran up to her and hugged her tightly. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," the girl said softly. She smiled and patted her head. "Thank you, dear. I just played what I felt." Later that evening, as people left the hall, they didn't talk about how difficult the piece was or how long it was. They talked about how it made them feel. One parent said it felt like she was telling a story with no words. And that was exactly what she had done. Without showing off, without speaking much, she had reminded everyone of something simple but powerful, that true talent is quiet, humble, and full of heart. After the concert, something changed in the atmosphere of the school. People walked a little slower through the halls, as if still holding on to the feeling of the music from that night. Teachers spoke about it in staff rooms, students mentioned it between classes, and even the parents who had come just to support their children now asked more questions about her. The video of her performance had been recorded by one of the teachers and quietly shared on the school's social media page. No one expected much at first, but within just a few days, the video began spreading. It was shared again and again. Comments came flooding in from musicians, students, and strangers from far-off places. "This touched my soul. Never heard someone play with such emotion. Who is this woman? Why haven't we heard of her before? The views kept rising. People were not just watching her, they were feeling her. Some even sent messages to the school asking if she gave lessons or would perform again. But she didn't talk about the video. When someone mentioned it, she smiled gently and changed the subject. For her, it was never about fame or popularity. She had already lived that part of life once, long ago. What mattered to her now was the music and the chance to quietly give it to others. One morning, she arrived early as usual, holding her small bag and folded shawl. The director of the school met her at the entrance with a kind smile. "We've been thinking," he said. "The children love learning from you. Teachers respect you, and you bring something special to this place. Would you consider staying with us? As a mentor? Even part-time?" She looked surprised. "I'm not sure," she said honestly. "I never thought about teaching formally." "But you already are," he replied. "Every time you show a child how to play with feeling, every time you guide them with patience, you're already doing the work of a teacher. The only difference would be a title." She stayed quiet for a few seconds, then nodded slowly. "All right," she said, "but only if I can still sit at the back sometimes." They both laughed. Word spread quickly that she would now be mentoring students. Everyone seemed excited. Even the shy students who usually didn't speak much now looked forward to her gentle advice. She became a quiet but steady part of the school. Not everyone talked to her, but everyone noticed when she entered a room. She began giving small lessons, not just about notes or rhythms, but about listening, feeling, and understanding the music. She would often say, "Don't worry about being perfect, worry about being real. Let the piano feel your heart." One boy who had struggled with timing finally played a full piece smoothly under her guidance. Another girl, who was afraid to perform in front of others, found courage after a few calm words from her. She never raised her voice. She never made anyone feel small. That was her power, quiet guidance that lifted people up. Outside the school, more people were now asking about her. The Music Foundation sent an email inviting her to speak at a small event. A local newspaper wrote a short piece about her, calling her the silent star who returned. But even as the world started noticing her again, she remained the same humble, kind, and focused on the students. One afternoon, she helped a child play a simple lullaby. The child looked up at her and asked, "Were you really a big star?" Once she smiled and replied, "That's just a name people give. What matters is what you do with the gift you're given." And with that, she placed the child's fingers back on the keys. And the lesson continued softly, patiently, and full of heart. Months passed. The quiet woman who once sat unnoticed at the back of the music class was now someone everyone admired, but she still remained the same. She didn't change her way of dressing. She didn't demand attention. She still brought her shawl, her old bag, and the same calm smile every day. Her lessons were never fancy. She used simple words, short stories, and real emotions to teach. When a student struggled, she didn't scold. She waited. She guided. She understood. Her method was slow, soft, but powerful. Students who were once unsure now played with confidence. Not because they were perfect, but because they believed in themselves. Every person in the school, from staff to students, had felt her kindness in some way. She had become more than just a teacher. She was a presence, a reminder that even the quietest people can carry the loudest lessons. One day, a group of students were preparing for a district-level music competition. Pressure was high, and many of them were nervous. The teachers helped them rehearse, but it was her soft voice that made the real difference. "Don't think about winning," she said. "Think about sharing something beautiful with the world." Those words stayed with the students. When they performed at the competition, something magical happened. They didn't just play well, they touched hearts. The audience clapped, not just out of habit, but out of feeling. The students didn't win first place, but they gained something far more important: confidence, pride, and the joy of expression. When they returned, they all ran to her with bright eyes and wide smiles. "You were right," one of them said. "It felt amazing." She just smiled and nodded. "I'm proud of you all." Outside of school, more invitations started coming. Small music events, cultural programs, even online interviews. People wanted to know about her story, where she had been, why she left, and why she returned. But she politely turned down most of them. "I'm not looking for the spotlight anymore," she would say kindly. "I'm happy where I am." Though she never said it out loud, deep down she knew something very personal. Her second chance didn't come from fame or applause. It came from being useful again, from being part of something bigger than herself, from helping others find their voice. One rainy afternoon, as she packed up after a lesson, a mother approached her with her daughter. The mother looked a bit emotional. "My daughter never believed she could be good at anything," she said. "But after learning from you, she doesn't just play better, she's happier. Thank you." The woman's eyes softened. She gently hugged the girl and said, "Music helped me too once, and now it's helping you." That evening, as the rain fell outside, she sat by the piano alone. The school was empty, the lights dim. She opened an old notebook filled with faded pencil markings, pieces she had written years ago. Before life took a different path, she began to play one of them, a tune no one else had heard before. Soft, slow, full of feeling. It wasn't for a crowd. It wasn't for an audience. It was for herself. A quiet gift after all these years. As the last note faded, she smiled. Not because of applause or praise, but because her heart was full. She had once been a name, then she became a memory. And now, she was something even greater. A guide, a light, a living reminder that talent never truly fades. It just waits for the right time to be shared again. And this time, she didn't need the world to see her. She had already found where she truly belonged.